On Joseph Jaffe is Not Famous Today, I'm joined by Bridget Schult, author of Overwork. We were basically it was the German American or the American German, so I'll probably butcher it a whole bunch of times, but it's all part of the experience. Now we're tackling the daily grind, the fight for time, and how gender equality shapes a life well lived. If you think overwork is just part of the job, think again. This one's a wake-up call, so let's get on with the show.
Hello, and thanks for joining us. I'm Kevin Nealon. Our top story tonight, it appears congratulations are in order. We are monitoring things closely as details continue to come in, but it seems... Yes, I have confirmation. We're talking about you, Joseph. Congratulations. You really outdid yourself this time, which probably wasn't that hard. Our team has discovered footage from one of the many celebrations taking place in your honor. Stay away from drugs, kids. Now for some deeper analysis, let's go live via satellite to our special guest commentator, Other Kevin. Other Kevin, what are your thoughts on all this? Speechless, Kevin. Wow. Just wow. Insightful as always. Thank you. Well, I'm now being told that we are out of time and that I should pull this lever. I'm Kevin Nealon. Thanks for watching. Take care, Jimmy.
Joseph Jaffe. I believe that's a Japanese name. And but I tell you what, he's not famous. He's famouser than he was or used to was. But fame is fleeting, like a paperweight. It just comes and goes.
There was one guy I was dealing with getting a little bit pissy over the kid interrupting the call thing, and I'm like, appreciate it.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, please. Yeah.
My bad. Please continue. It's very alliterative.
They are going to be the ones powering the experiences that every customer has.
Preference has power. I'm pretty sure Cato would say to me when I do every show, stop.
I think he would.
Those peeps are popping. Wait till you get the invoice.
Here. I have a question. When's the last time you danced? When's the last time you laughed?
Right now. I don't want to dance with you.
When's the last time you flew a kite?
Toasted Oreo.
Look at you. You are insane.
How did I do that?
You're
insane.
You're insane.
Welcome back to another episode of Joseph Jaffe is Not Famous. And why would I be famous? How could I be famous when I have a really famous person, Bridget Schult, and I've just got to I'm saying Schult, but I just want to say Schult. So, Bridget Bridget Jones is on the show with me. She wrote a best-selling book called Overwork, and it was widely regarded as one of the best books in the last year, and a book that is coming at a time when we need it. We need it. We need to figure out how to get over hustle culture. We need to figure out how to find balance between work and home. And by the way, what happens when work is home, when the commute to your home office is just a few steps away? And what if you're being told to come back into the office, and if you don't, you're going to lose your job? There's a lot of stress. There's a lot of anxiety. There's so much stuff going on in the world right now. And on top of that, we have to figure out how to actually reduce anxiety. Is it possible that going to work could feel like going to the spa? Why shouldn't it be possible? You don't need the answers from me, because I have the expert coming in, and we will see her shortly. As always, I start off the show with my why statement. Why? Because I gotta. That's it's time to PART. Why? Because I gotta. As a teacher, facilitator, and coach, I help high aspiring entrepreneurs, owners, and their leadership teams get unstuck, return to growth, and become forever changed. The unstuck part of it is this show, what you're experiencing now. The show was started when people were stuck at home or stuck in general. So if you're stuck, the only solution is to get unstuck. I'm a business and leadership coach, and I help companies figure out how to grow, return to growth. And finally, the name of my sixth book, Forever Changed: How a Global Pandemic Changed My Direction, My Purpose, and My Life. So much of this is related to the concept of work. Do what you love what you do. Amor, veritas, vigor. Do what you love, be true to yourself, and stay the course. And one of the things I'm so excited to talk to Bridget, because people talk about this idea of a labor of love, and I talk about a love of labor. When you really love what you do, it doesn't feel like work anymore, does it? I also do from time to time these social audio type of thingies. I guess they call that a podcast. The Collective Cafe, where we meet once or twice a week to do things like live book reads. At the moment, reading an amazing book called Who Not How. When you get stuck, instead of obsessing and getting frustrated over the how, all you need to do is find yourself a who, and maybe that will reduce some of your workplace stress. And if you don't want to tune in live, or Clubhouse or Chatter or some of these platforms are not for you, you can subscribe. Just go to bit.ly/collective cafe to go. Get your coffee, get your cafe, get your Jaffe juice on the go. But now it's time for our seated soliloquy. And the seated soliloquy today is called Overpaid, Overworked. Now, obviously, you've figured out that I put a little bit of a spin on this. Normally, they say the idea of I'm underpaid and overworked. But, the overworked part, I guess, is what we're going to focus on today. The overpaid. Why overpaid? Because I don't think it's about the money, first of all. It's never about the money. I mean, when we think about price, and when we think about the idea of price and quality determines value. At the end of the day, two people can pay the same amount for the same product, but one feels like they got ripped off and the other feels like they got the deal of the century. So if there's a concept of value when it comes to us as consumers, maybe there's even a concept of value when it comes to work. The amount you paid and how much you feel overworked. What does it mean, overworked? Is it hours of the day? Is it quantity? Or is it quality in terms of the value that you bring to the table, the value that you feel or are made to feel that you deliver? Are you appreciated by your boss? Do you feel like you've added value? Do you feel like you've been heard? Do you feel like you've made a difference? I'd like to challenge us all, instead of obsessing on the underpaid versus overpaid part, maybe what we should be doing is thinking about the underworked versus overworked, and whether that is a quality or a quantity type of aspect. How do we find the perfect balance? Because I'll tell you, people do a lot of volunteer work where they don't get paid, and yet they feel like they've really worked hard. The concept of rolling up your sleeves, getting your hands dirty, an honest day's work. What does an honest day's work mean? Is it about physical labor? Is it about menial labor? Or is it about value-driven and value-laden labor? This is a critical time for us to be having these conversations. It is an important time because talent, people are everything. Without people, you have no purpose, you have no business. And on top of that, we are living in a time when companies will rather cut costs than invest in people. Companies will rather automate and move to AI than be able to figure out how to harness the incredible, fallible, vulnerable, and imperfect perfection of people. But enough from me. It's now time to bring on the real expert, Bridget Schult. A little bit of background on Bridget. She's a journalist, keynote speaker, and author of Overwork, Transforming the Daily Grind in the Quest for a Better Life and the New York Times bestselling Overwhelmed, Work, Love, and Play When No One Has the Time. She was an award-winning journalist for the Washington Post and part of the team that won the 2008 Pulitzer Prize. She's the director of the Better Life Lab, the Work, Family, Justice, Care, and Gender Equity program at New America. Her work has appeared in numerous publications, including the New York Times, Harvard Business Review, the Financial Times, and many others. Let's welcome her to the show. Bridget, welcome to Joseph Jaffe Is Not Famous.
Yeah, it's so great to be here.
So now you've seen the full one-man band production. That is the circus we call Joseph Jaffe Is Not Famous.
I love it. And you said that I was famous, but I would like to put myself in your category. I don't consider myself famous, nor do I want to be. I love the work that I do, and I want to keep doing it and sharing it with other people. That's part of what sort of drives me as well. That's part of my work is, not only going out and having questions and doing the reporting and the research to try to understand it, but then weaving it into a story and then sharing it with other people. And just that's what really motivates me.
Well, listen, the most important thing is you don't want to be infamous. So, how about we both stay away from infamy and we can focus on non-famy or just for me?
Let's do it. Just for me.
Just for me. Well, the show is for me and for you. So we'll start off with the ridiculous and then we'll move into the sublime. I'm a big fan of David Brooks and the whole concept of eulogy virtues that mix in with resume virtues. It's so, when I started the show, and I don't even know if it was called a show back in March of 2020, I wanted to create the Daily Show for business. I wanted to bring a talk show, a business talk show, but one with a little bit more entertainment and more of an experiential vibe. And so the way I did that, it was basically by embarrassing my guests through a little segment that I called Fun Facts. So we sent our investigators into the field to find out some deep, dark, and sordid truths about our guests. And this is what we found about you. First of all, you have a bit of a fascination with marbles. Some of your favorite fun stories that you've written have been about a $10,000 reward for a lost jar of marbles, amongst other things. Tell us about some of your favorite stories, because, it's great when we read, we have our own favorite stories and favorite short stories, but it's always nice to hear from the author's standpoint about, their favorites.
Yeah. So, when I think about the stories that I like to read or the stories that really touch me, it's really all about trying to understand us as humans. What drives us, what gives us, hope or motivation, or why we do what we do. When I was at the Washington Post, I was part of a sort of an enterprise team, and it was our job to just write stories about the way we live. A lot of my work, it looks at academic research and literature and policy and, storytelling and bringing all of these really serious and complicated issues together and looking for solutions. But what I like to do is do that in a way that tells it through a story. I think that's what novelists and creative fiction writers do so well. It's like you can finish a novel and you've learned a lot of history and policy. You just didn't know it. It's like the vegetables got, pureed in there and you digest it. But this particular story, I came across it. I had taken my children to get ice cream after school, and there was a bulletin board in the ice cream shop, and it offered a $10,000 reward for anybody who could find this lost jar of marbles. And I thought, there is a story here. And so I ended up calling and asking about it, and it really turned into a very, kind of wistful story about love and loss and, a really difficult breakup and, an act of rashness of throwing out these marbles that meant an awful lot to a partner and, and then feeling remorse and wanting it back and trying to find some kind of way to reconnect and, kind of restore a sense of justice or relationship. And it was really very poignant. And I think that that's one of the reasons why I love stories like that can, sort of take you by surprise, but help us all understand a little bit more this wonderful and very complicated thing we call life.
Well, look, the only way that I relate to that is that we recently moved house, and my wife put a lot of effort and energy into a tag sale sign. I think also both of us, as you know, as immigrants, we, you know, the whole concept of a tag sale was kind of new to us, and I put it onto Facebook Marketplace at $1 million, which is, so I put the tag sale sign on as a tag sale for $1 million. There were no takers though. But I, you know, if someone had made an offer, and I also just, a couple of things I didn't want to sell because they were so meaningful to me. So I also added several zeros onto that. Surprisingly, they never sold, and so I still have those items.
Well, and wasn't that the point, right? Sort of putting a price on it that others wouldn't pay, but because it's something as priceless to you. And I think that's what makes people interesting, you know?
I know. Well, everything has a story.
Yeah.
Well, okay, so let's stay within fiction, or maybe it's nonfiction. We're not really sure, because as it turns out, you're a huge science fiction fan, and Spock from the original Star Trek was your first crush. So let's imagine the wedding between Spock and Bridget, and we actually have a photo of.
That's hilarious.
I mean, the two of you kind of look like those two characters from Thunderbirds, like you know the marionettes that I don't know if you ever saw that series, but that's pretty. I mean, you know, I would tell you something, Bridget. Seriously, AI cannot make ugly people look good. So you know, so like I cannot, no matter what I do, AI will not. AI will only make good-looking people look even more good-looking, and so you and Spock are a match made in heaven.
Oh my God, that's hilarious. Yeah, well, you know, they're missing his little 1960s fringe, you know, the bangs, and yeah.
Well, he cleaned up good for you. So.
I guess so. This is hilarious. Yeah, if you like to embarrass people, this is certainly it.
We also don't know whether you have Vulcan ears or not. I'm also a Star Trek fan, by the way.
Well, the original Star Trek, I grew up with it. It's so funny, back in the, you know, late 60s, early 70s. And, you know, back then there were 3 stations. And, you know, if you were a kid, you watched everything, you know, there just wasn't a whole lot of options like there are now. But my sisters and I, you know, we were all just completely fascinated by Star Trek and the different worlds that it would take you to. And honestly, as you know, I have to say, one of the things that I think it really influenced me is sort of like, you saw all sorts of different people on the bridge, you know? And I think that was a really powerful image for me as a kid, to see that it wasn't all just white men in charge, you know? I mean, it was lots, you know, Captain Kirk, you know, certainly there were lots of white men in charge, but, you know, showing, you know, women and people from different backgrounds, and sort of like everybody had a place. And I have to say, I think that was really influential for me as a kid, as sort of silly as that sounds.
No, I mean, I've actually had a bunch of Trekkies. I'm a Trekkie too, and we've had the discussion on the show about how Star Trek was ahead of its time in terms of diversity, equity, inclusion, very naturally, and not forced in any way. So I guess they hadn't got the memo yet. So.
Well, and, you know, honestly, thankfully that's set in the future. So maybe, you know, we figured out that, you know, that all sorts of people have all sorts of skills and talents, and that we need to open opportunity for everybody fairly, you know, because I think that's what I loved about the message of the show. And I think that's really honestly what drives a lot of the work that I do now. How can we create true, equal, fair opportunity for everyone, so that they have the opportunity to live a good life, and not just the lucky few who tend to be really rich, but, you know, frankly, sometimes pretty miserable.
Yeah, well, I think that's a key word, right? Opportunity, and we'll come back to that. Unfortunately, now we're talking about the future, and I'm not sure that you and I will live forever. Even though advancements in medical technology and science have extended our lives, but at some point we are going to leave this planet, and when you do, you're going to be leaving with trail mix. So tell us more about that story. Little bit of a dark twist.
Yeah, it is, but it's really funny. My kids always make fun of me that trail mix is my favorite food. It's the perfect balance of salt and crunch and a little bit of sweet and and I love the idea that I would be out hiking. So that's probably when I probably would burn off all of those calories, but I don't. So I'm sitting in my office, and that was a problem for me during the pandemic, sitting sitting in my home office eating a lot of trail mix. But so my kids often joke, it's like after I die, because we are here for a limited time only, to keep my hungry ghost happy, I said, just, throw trail mix, on my ashes every now and again.
All right, so just don't eat them. So
No,
we'll leave it at that. All right, so we're going to get into the topic now of of this reality, and I think the backdrop in my mind the whole time is how much have we advanced, or how much have we progressed, or in fact have we regressed or returned to an outdated or an antiquated way of thinking about work. But I think what I'd like to do before I ask you to set up, and maybe a good way to set up is to talk about the first book and the second book. I don't know about you, but when I've written books, they almost feel like chapters of a bigger book.
Yeah.
So it's the book ends and then you begin with something else and it's the next chapter. But, The Devil Wears Prada, 9 to 5, the US, certainly even portrayed by Hollywood, has depicted this idea of work as a place for the intense, the ambitious, the ruthless, this hustle culture, even in the entrepreneurial world. Let's start off there and talk about how you see the culture of work for the most part, and the good, the bad, and the ugly of it.
Right. So, and I think it's important to point out that it hasn't always been this way. There certainly is an ethic in the United States of hard work. A lot of people who've come here, this is, unless you were a Native American, everyone else is an immigrant. And there is that sort of restless immigrant spirit that has really pushed and driven the United States. People come here to remake their lives, or, to live whatever their version of the American dream is, to achieve. So there is this kind of restless, hard work achievement culture that is just clearly part of kind of has long been part of the American psyche. And yet at the same time, there's always been, a recognition of, say if you're part of a religious tradition, the idea of Sabbath or the idea of rest, that there is balance that you need in your life. That yes, to be a hard charging worker, but people like to say that family is important, and we can certainly talk about that, how that shows up differently for people of different ideologies. But really what's happened in recent years has is this sort of like hard work culture. What I argue is that it's morphed into this really dangerous, truly unproductive and unfair overwork culture, where, and you're right, I did start reporting this book the minute after I finished writing the first book, because the first book was about overwhelm and time pressure and feeling there wasn't enough time to do what you needed and wanted to do in a day. And I looked at that really through the lens of my own story, kind of. So gender equality was a big thing that I explored there. And at the end of reporting on that book, I became so convinced that so much of what drives overwhelm is the way we think about, organize, and do work, particularly in the United States. And why that's important is because the American culture seeps out and becomes very influential in other places. We have this American story that to be the best, or the wealthiest superpower, we have to work in this way, that this is just what it requires. And if that's true, what I found is that for knowledge and office workers, the expectation has become you will overwork in one job. Think about the way we talk. Can you give 150%? I want go-getters. I want people to live, sleep, eat, breathe, drink, work. In Silicon Valley, you had people bragging about spending the night under their desks. On Wall Street, you have people, staying all night, or like going home for an hour just to take a shower and come back. So we have these stories that to operate and to achieve at these high levels, you have to just be always on. You've got the Elon Musks of the world saying you'll never change the world in 40 hours a week, sort of this go, push, 90 hours isn't even enough. So if you take a step back from that, well, who's able to do that kind of work? Who can put in that kind of time? It's certainly not anybody with care responsibilities. So because it becomes this self-fulfilling cycle, really. So if women are expected to be the primary caregivers, which they have been, if you get into these professions and you want equal opportunity, it almost doesn't matter what your skills are. It doesn't matter what you produce, because what we are judging and what we are rewarding are long hours and presence, whether virtually, sending late night emails, or in an office. And so in that way, it doesn't really matter if you have diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, because the way you've structured work has made it virtually impossible for someone, say, with care responsibilities, or somebody who is struggling with their own disability or illness. You've made it impossible for them to compete fairly. On the other end of the socioeconomic spectrum, what I found is that we've increasingly made hourly service care jobs increasingly more precarious. There's not enough pay, so you can't really support your life. The hours are unpredictable, and sometimes you don't get enough hours. Your income can swing as much as 30% in a month, but your rent doesn't shift. So then what I found is that people are overworking by stringing together several different jobs or side hustles or gigs. So everyone is feeling pressed for time. They're putting so much of their energy into work that we're giving short shrift to the other areas that make for a good life, which, the Harvard psychologist Eric Erickson, I took it for the title of my first book. He said, a rich and full, wholehearted life has time for meaningful work, for love, care, and connection. And the third great arena is for play and joy. So there is a real through line between the two books. And the starting point of this book was really asking the question, okay, well, if this is what we believe, that we have to work this way, is that true? Do we have to? Is this really the only way to do great work? Is this really the only way to succeed? And I'll give you the Cliff Notes version. No, it's not. There's lots of different ways to work and succeed. And so that's sort of, I have sort of three big arguments in the book, and I feel like I've been talking too much, so I can talk about those now, or I can shut up.
I will tell you just one anecdote, which will give you permission to continue, which is after a couple months of doing this, my wife storms in, and she's like wringing her, like she's like almost wringing my neck, but wringing like her head, and she's saying, like, stop already. You just talk and talk and talk, and you talk over and you interrupt, and you're like, she's like, just let your guest talk. And so that was the birth of active listening, and me not even writing and preparing all these laborious show notes. So talk as long as you want. If you feel you're talking too much, it may be because you are, but it also may just be in your head, because people want to listen to you. So I want to hear the three premises, but I'll use this as a natural pause to say, when I saw the book as well, I also interpreted it as I'm over work.
Yeah.
Like as in, you know what?
Done.
I'm done. And I think about my kids' generation. I think about from younger millennials to Gen Zers to the fact that they're just not going to be held to the same standards and the same principles and the same artificial constraints that we culturally were born into, that we believed indicated that when we're busy, we're productive, and that we had to be busy in order to demonstrate our value. So that was I'm sure that was intentional, but I guess this is what happens when people either burn out or cash out and say, you know what, screw you.
Yeah, and we really have a burnout crisis. The World Health Organization, it's not just in the United States, it's worldwide. So there are really serious issues around the way we organize, think about, and do work. And I think that you're right. That's what's so interesting to see young people. I will say every generation, people hope that the young people will be the ones to sort of fix this problem. And to me, that's too much of a burden to ask of young people. I think that we all need to work together so that so that the systems and the workplaces that young people are coming into are going to be places they want to be, rather than places that they run screaming from, which is what so many of them do feel, And you saw that during the pandemic with so many people, just whether it was just like, I'm out of here. And so you're right. The title of the book is not just being overworked, but like, I'm done, over it. We got to figure out how to do it differently. And so that's the 3 sort of points of the book that I make. And the first is really, again, coming from my own life, from my own experience, and from a lot of the research that I do on care, is we need to start thinking about work in a much bigger way, that it's not just what we do for pay, but it is also the unpaid work of care and home. It is also the volunteering that you mentioned in your opening. It's the what we give back to our communities. It's how we're involved in our civic life. That is all work. There's this one Dutch historian, his name is Jan Lucassen, and he wrote this fabulous book called The Story of Work. It's a thick tome. And it's one of the points he made early on, and I have to say really influenced me as I was reporting this book. And the way he defined work is that work is everything that is not leisure. So that's how I like to think about work, because I just think about myself, all of the care that you give your kids, all of the administrative work it takes to run a household. The oven goes out, you got to find the repair person, you got to pay the bill. I forgot to pay the taxes. It's like, that's a full-time job right there, just to run a household and take care of people, not just our children, but we ourselves get sick. Increasingly, we have aging parents that we need to care for. So all of that is work. So the first point is we need to think much bigger, explode our idea about what work is. The second issue, or the second point, is all of that work should be good work. And again, going back to Lucassen, he looked all throughout human history, and he said good work throughout human history has been defined by 3 principles: meaning, fairness, and cooperation. And I love that. If you can bring that to your paid work, then you get to connect with all of those things that you talk about that is good about work. Feeling that you have a sense of purpose, that you're contributing to the world, that you're making it a better place, that you belong, that you have purpose, so there's meaning, but it's fair. You're treated fairly. You're not overworked and overpaid, or underworked and underpaid. It's fair. And I like to think about that not just in terms of the paid work, but also unpaid work. Right now, a lot of the time use studies show that women are still doing 2 to 3 times the amount of care work and, the unpaid housework. That's not fair. And one of the reasons why is because we have this, hustle, ideal worker culture that requires you to be always on. So if one of you has to do that, and we tend to think that women should have the care responsibility. So that means men are kind of stuck in this breadwinner role, and many of them can't, or they feel like they can't. They don't have the time, or they're worried about trying to share more of the housework and childcare and elder care. And so we've sort of frozen people in these kind of traditional gender roles that isn't fair to anyone. And what if we could change work so that people could, again, find that fulfillment and do an effective job, not be rewarded simply for being busy, but being rewarded for what you do, your output, your performance, your results. And then where you do it, when you do it, how you do it matters less. So the book is really a call for, I would say, fair, effective work. And if you do that, and I've got all sorts of examples throughout the book of organizations that have done that, of public policy in different countries that really support that, of individuals who've made that personal transformation. So that's the third point of the book, is that it's possible, that there is no one right way to work. And hustle culture, long work hours, ideal worker culture, kind of that leads to what I call stupid work, kind of busy work, performance of work. And so if you can really focus on effective work, you're going to get to the diversity, equity, and inclusion, that you're going to get to that fair opportunity. if you focus on the right things. So that's the last message, is it's entirely possible, and it's up to us to make it happen. And so that's why the book, in every chapter, there's a story. There's tough stuff in there. There's tough stories, but every chapter ends with a bright spot of like, look, here's a person who did it differently. Look, here's an organization doing it differently. Look, here's an advocacy group that are fighting for like really cool things. Look, here's a country that's doing it differently. So, here's a private equity investor who's decided to only invest in good jobs, so there are all sorts of people doing really cool things to make work better, which then makes more room for our lives and care, and for us to be able to live that wholehearted good life.
And there's so many sub points that I think are so vital in this conversation. The one is, I think about trust, and I think about work cultures of of high trust, but also high accountability.
Yeah.
It seems to be that's the missing link, is that you generally get one but not the other, because this ability to want to monitor and eavesdrop and spy and and micromanage all of the bad aspects of work, as opposed to work being trust based or deliverable based, outcome based, and allowing people to do their jobs, and recognizing that maybe the ship has sailed in terms of being on top and suffocating our workers and our employees. So high trust, high culture, high accountability. Is that a utopian dream, or is that absolute, or is it possible?
I think it's absolutely possible. I think that you're right. We're not there right now. And you see that in all of these return to office fights. That to me, at its very heart, is about a lack of trust. Well, actually, at its very heart, it's often about real estate. It's often about people who've made big real estate investments, and they want people back in, but then they're not honest about it. So then they kind of tell stories about how we need to be together for culture or for collaboration. And I'm here to tell you right now that there is no research, no definitive research that says you have to be in the same room to have the most innovation and the most productivity. In fact, what the research, if you look at, like Nick Bloom out of Stanford and others who've been researching, different ways of working since long before the pandemic, what they're finding is that hybrid work, where you have that flexibility in place. So sometimes you're working elsewhere, sometimes you're working in an office setting, sometimes you're doing concentrated work on your own, sometimes you're collaborating intentionally with a team, that if you set that up well, those tend to be the organizations that are most productive, have the best results, and also the healthiest and happiest workers with well-being. So those, if you're going to set them up, and set them up with so that they'll work, because a lot of people set them up so that they'd fail, frankly. Another reason for a lot of the return to office is they want to get rid of people. I mean, that's what you see with the Trump administration. Everybody back in the office 5 days a week, and we hope most of you will quit. Amazon, people have thought of that as sort of a soft layoff. The danger with that then is you don't know who's going to leave. And so maybe you're going to lose all the people that you don't want to leave. So you've lost control, in an effort like that. But it's entirely possible. What I found is sort of like what I like to think of as sort of a success process. And I found this was true in work redesigns prior to COVID, in the best COVID experiments, and also in some short work hours experiments that I spent time studying. And they all do the same thing. So how they do, sort of like what it ends up looking like is different. It really depends on your team, your organization, the type of work you do. So it's not like there's one magic pill from the Matrix that you're going to swallow and it's all going to be telling you what to do. But if you follow this process, it's pretty much what everybody did. And the first thing is everybody just sort of took a deep breath and said, what is our work? What are we really doing? What really matters? And sort of like thinking about that, I like to think about it as the core then. What creates value for the organization? Where do I feel the greatest sense of fulfillment? And so then if that's the most important thing, work backwards from there. Well, then how do all the processes ladder up to that? How am I spending my day, so that we can get to that outcome. How is my team spending their time? How have I organized their workflow, or how have I organized the staffing so that we get to that, to that agreed upon, core value? And instead, what I found are a lot of people, when you ask, well, why do you do things like this? They're like, well, we've always done it this way. So there's kind of like a status quo bias. It's like, well, I don't know, we've done it this way, or the boss likes it. And a lot of really creative experiments failed, not because they didn't work, and the evidence showed that they did. And it's not that people were even more productive, they were happier, but they failed because leaders didn't like it, because it wasn't the way they worked. And so I think that was one of the surprising things that I found in the reporting, is simply the power of what leaders believe, whether it's true or not, in shaping culture, which then ends up really influencing the way that people can live their lives. So in that success sort of strategy, what I ended up finding was that, so there's a lot of sort of, the status quo bias. So there's not really a lot of thought about what that real value of work is. There's sort of lip service about it, but really doing the hard work of figuring that out and being really clear on everybody and what their roles are. So kind of like doing the work of mapping your work out. Instead, what we do is we get caught up in what I like to think of as sort of the second rung of the concentric circles of how we work. And that's what I call the work around the work. Emails, meetings, Slack messages, Asana and Notion, all of those things that should help get us to that valuable work, that effective work, but often doesn't. And we just get stuck round and round and round and round we go. So we get to the end of the day and we feel like we've been really busy. And then when we think about, well, what have I done? Well, I answered a bunch of emails. Well, does that get you to your priority? Does that get you to the most value? So a lot of people end of the day feeling incredibly burned out, and they've been busy all day, running from meeting to meeting, but they didn't get to that one big thing that really mattered to them or that they really needed to do. And so then work spills over into the evening or into the weekends, and then it starts eating into the rest of your life. And then the third kind of concentric ring that I found in my reporting is, we sort of talked about it already. I call it the performance of work. So if you're in a workplace where the boss likes to come in early or stay late, or sends late night emails, or signals how important it is. It's like, I can tell the most committed people because they're here late every night, or I can tell that they're the best workers because they worked every weekend. If you're signaling that kind of ideal worker, long hours, busy culture, well, then what you're going to do is you're going to create incentives for people to look like they're doing that, even if they're not, because they know that's what's rewarded. And so people will go to meetings that they don't necessarily need to go to. They'll send late night emails. They'll respond to Slacks. Look at me, I'm amazing. I'm working. And so you end up, I went to Japan, where overwork is a huge problem there. And I spoke with researchers there, and I love this one researcher's name is Hiroshi Ono. And he's come up with a term for it. He calls it waste. It's waste. It's not productive work. It's not effective work. And all it does is it steals from your life. And I ended up calling it stupid work.
I am going to give you the first official air horn, which is, I was, every synapse was firing off there. And I loved it because it also, for me, what is life well lived for me is now being a coach. And so much of what I do was validated just now, in terms of clarity, roles, eliminating ambiguity, delegating and elevating, all of the stuff. I absolutely loved what you said. It just made sense. And so I'm going to give you a gift back in return, which is, please look out for Bridget's new book, sure to be a bestseller, The Second Rung, Eliminating the Work Around the Work, available wherever books are sold. I love it. The Second Rung. It sounds like a science fiction, like we're back to Star Trek. I'm going to stay like no light questions and superficial questions here today. I want to talk about capitalism. I want to talk about the fact that it seems like that you cannot talk about overwork and not have it linked to essentially capitalism. And I'm going to go like even one step further and talk about minimum wage
Mm.
and talk about the fact that we are, I think we need to take some reflection or introspection and realize, and this is how it's all coming together. It may not even be us, but when people are forced to take second and third and fourth jobs, ultimately, if we are in first position, we are going to suffer. We will suffer because inevitably they're going to burn out. It is just inevitable. So why are we struggling when we put performance over profits, when we, or I should say profits over people, I should say profits over people. Why haven't we figured that out? And I'm asking, is minimum wage the key potentially to begin to solve some of these much bigger, systemic issues?
I think it's a really great question. And I think what's important to remember, I spoke with an economist from MIT named David Otter, and I loved the way that he talked about capitalism. He said, in the United States, we have what he called cowboy capitalism, like wild, wild west, market rules, go for it, very few regulations. We haven't really, our labor laws, the labor standards were first promulgated in like 1938. They haven't really been updated since then. The 40-hour work week was something that was pioneered not only by unions, but Henry Ford back in the 20s, Other cultures, they have more policy guardrails to try to prioritize human well-being. And, he called those cuddly capitalism. So there are different kinds of capitalism, and I know that it's very fashionable to say, it's exploitive and late stage capitalism and on and on. I think what's really important is that there is a movement, even within business itself, to think about responsible capitalism. How can you, there's no doubt there's like creativity and innovation and good things that come, from a free market and from capitalism. But even Adam Smith talked about having guardrails, so that it wasn't a wild west, so that it wasn't, a system that would really produce such grotesque inequality. And that's really what's happened, particularly in the United States. We are one of the most unequal economies, societies, when you look at income and wealth. It doesn't have to be that way. A lot of those are policy choices that we make at the public policy level, at the corporate level, and we can make different choices. What's really ended up happening in the last several decades is the influence of, people like Milton Friedman, who said the purpose of a corporation is to make a lot of money, but not for everybody, the stakeholders, the way people used to think, but for shareholders. And then we're going to really reward CEOs, and so that's where we're going to put our money. And then the politicians loved that idea. And they thought, okay, so then what we'll do is we'll make the wealthy even wealthier, and then somehow all of that goodness will trickle down to the rest of us. So it's a type of capitalism that is really destructive and dangerous. And that's, it hasn't proved true. It hasn't proved to be the case. Because if you look, Rand put together an analysis, and they found that, really in the last several decades, $5 trillion of wealth have transferred from the lowest quartiles in the society in the United States to the very, very top. And when you even look at economic indicators, everybody was so surprised at the last election that people were upset about the economy. Well, what do we report on? We report on the stock market. Half of Americans don't have a penny in the stock market, so that doesn't mean anything to them. We talk about jobs and how many jobs were created, but we never go the second step and say, well, how many of those were good jobs? How many of them pay enough to support a human life, much less a family? So you ask about minimum wage. Getting the basics right is really a key to not only a healthy work, but a stable democracy and civil society. What we've done is we've hollowed out the middle class. They're the job creators. They're the ones that do the civic work. They're the ones that are the backbone of democracy. And so I think it's up to not only policymakers, but also corporate leaders, where CEOs once made 30 times what the average worker did, and now they're making 300 to 1,000 or more. So we need to have a conversation about, well, what's responsible. I love the research, the spirit level that some demographers out of the UK do. And they've found that when societies are more equitable, when there's more equality, gender equality, racial equality, income equality, wealth equality, everybody benefits.
Amen and hallelujah, in that order. I want to kind of turn the conversation to actually people that are experiencing overwork. What do you say to someone who is watching, who is feeling that agita, that anxiety, that knows that they are going through this scenario? What's the first thing? What's the first step that they should take? What advice do you give to them to go about trying to remedy or reverse the curse, if you will?
Yeah. So I think the first step toward any change is awareness, and I think one of the things that I'm trying to do, so many people feel alone. When I wrote my first book, I felt so alone that I somehow couldn't figure out how to, do a good job at work and be a good parent and a good mother. But I found, once I started writing about it, I wasn't alone. A lot of people were struggling. And the same thing with work. We feel alone, or that everybody else has it figured out, or, that I'm the only one struggling. But we're not. One of the stories in the book that I found so powerful were even, retail workers and service workers feeling so alone that they didn't have the money, they didn't have predictable schedules, their pay was low, and they felt like, why is my life so difficult? I can't make it work. And they started sharing their stories with each other and realizing it wasn't just them, that it was a system, and that they could work together to change. So I guess that's what I would say is a couple things is first, be aware the waters that we're swimming in reward you. I mean, I have a chapter on workaholism, and some of the people that I spoke to, and, I have workaholic tendencies. I am very honest about that. I struggle with it myself to this day, so I'm a constant work in progress. And it's very difficult when you love what you do. There's always a lot more to do. My job is to try to change, the world so that there's work, family justice, gender equality, and everybody values care, paid and unpaid care. Well, when is my day done? When is enough enough? When is it enough? When are you done? And so many of our jobs are not like factory jobs where, like, I've made X number of widgets, I can go home. So it's hard to know where to put your own guardrails, and especially if you're passionate about it, and if you're in a society and an organization that values long hours and sees it as a sign that you're working really hard and commitment. So just be aware that there's all sorts of pressures that make it hard to push back against. So first, awareness. And secondly, honestly, I give people sort of, for personal transformation, the same sort of guidance that I see companies and organizations following, which is go through that success process yourself. What is your core work? Where do you create the most value for whatever position you're in? Where is it that you want to be creating value? What gives you a sense of fulfillment? If it's not a right match, can you do some job crafting to focus on the parts of the job that do work for you? If it's not the right job, is there a better job for you?
It's a slow down. It's a, at EOS, we'd call it a clarity break, just the ability to take stock. But you said something even earlier, which I just want to kind of emphasize: community. And that's what I picked up: the support, a support group, the ability just to realize that you're not alone, and that sometimes just other people are going through it too, and in that you can find some different type of collaboration in commiseration, I suppose.
Yeah.
I also want to, something else that resonated with me is what we've been kind of exposed to is this idea of 150 days of work. This is as a coach: 150 days in session, 65 what are called buffer days, where you're doing your admin and your billing and your biz dev, and then 150 free days. We call that the EOS life, right? That is the better life component. But the interesting nuance, why I wanted to bring this up, is that in the 150 free days, those are not 150 days where you're lying on the beach or playing Xbox. It could include me doing the show, because it is, if it includes your passion, whether your passion is skydiving or kite surfing or being a talk show host, that counts.
Mm.
And I love that clarification that says, because you gave a definition of work that is not leisure. I mean, could I call this leisure? I could, but it's more like, I would definitely put this in the 150 free, because it feeds my soul and it feeds my why.
Mm, I love that. Well, it's really interesting. The first book, I looked a lot more at leisure and leisure research. And I think what struck me most about that is what leisure is, it's in the eye of the beholder, but it requires two things: choice and control. So did you freely choose the activity? Like you say,
Mm.
does it feed your soul? And do you have control over your time? Are you interrupted? Can you actually really get into that flow state? So I love that. It's an important thing to think about when it comes to
I
leisure.
also, and I love choice and control as the definition of leisure. I want to, there's still a few things that I want to time flies. I told you time flies when,
Well, maybe I talk too much. I'm sorry.
no. It's a great it's a wonderful conversation. As I said, it's an important one. Quick question. This is a quick fire. What do you do if you're on the opposite end of the spectrum? Or I'll put it differently. Is the remedy to overwork just something that is reserved for the elites, the managers, the white collars, the bosses? And what do you do if you're in that situation to bring the solution to people that are lower level?
Yeah, to me, it's really important. So that's why the book deals with people across the spectrum, the socioeconomic spectrum of paid work, but also includes unpaid care work. The whole last chapter is sort of like a meditation on what is work and thinking about it as sort of a future of work. So no, I think it's really important that we think really broadly. I'm trying to find ways. We're already so divided and bifurcated in so many different ways. And, if you read a lot of management literature and business literature, it's all focused on the office worker. It's all focused on the knowledge worker. I think it's really important for knowledge workers to understand that even in the United States, 44% of the workforce is considered low wage. We have to care about that. That's a lot of people, so I'm trying to sort of bring us all into a sense of we're all in this together. So the people, with the office work, the knowledge work, they have a lot of power. They can make different decisions. They can also make people's lives so much better on that, in that hourly and service sector.
So I always find a quote for my guest, and this one, it's an interesting one, and you probably know who said it, but it's kind of a little interesting who did say it. The quote is, it was written a while ago. Your lab might have taken issue with this, but a man who dares waste 1 hour of time has not discovered the value of life. And do you know who said this?
I have no idea, but I don't disagree.
Charles Darwin. Yeah. Well, Charles Darwin said it. A man who dares waste 1 hour of time has not discovered the value of life. And I thought it'd be interesting when we talk about evolution, right? Survival of the fittest, that here we're talking about wasting even an hour of time. If anything is true, we waste a lot of time at work.
That's exactly what I was thinking. Exactly.
So, so on the basis of that, I'm actually just gonna ask you a bit of a science fiction question, which is, I want you to take yourself into the future. I want to get radical. You and Spock are now,
I was going to say, so am I Mrs. Spock now?
or Mr. and Mrs. Spock, indeed. But
my husband might not like that very much, but okay.
Okay, so if you were designing work from scratch, right? Completely utopian. No, you don't have to incrementalize. You've got a blank canvas, complete clean slate. Paint a picture. Tell me what work looks like in your mind's eye.
I think it goes back to thinking about, what is it? What is our goal? What is it that we want? What are we creating? What's the society that we're living in? It starts there. There's always the basic survival. Of course, you have to survive, but what are we doing? What kind of society do we want to be? How do we want people to live in it? What are the tasks that people need to do? How do we delegate them fairly? How do we create equal opportunity? I think those are all the questions to be thinking about, and how to absolutely not waste too much time at work so that we can, get on with the business of living a good life. And I will say about Charles Darwin, he worked about 4 hours a day. He would go on long walks, and he did a lot of his thinking on his long walks. So, I don't think you would call his walks a waste, but I think if you were in an ideal worker culture, people would think that he's a slacker because he only sort of like worked at a desk 4 hours a day. So I think that's important. I think for us to kind of complicate the narrative a little bit, and see what's really, focus on what's really true.
Please look out for Bridget's next book. Charles Darwin was a slacker. Okay, but you teed up what now will be the final question, which is to what end, and to what end is the concept of a better life. So define a better life for me.
Yeah, boy, that's a hard one. I think I just have to go back to Erik Erikson again. Again, so much of it, like leisure, it's in the eye of the beholder. It's what feels important and right to you. But it's having an openness, a freedom, an opportunity to have something meaningful. Like work you can define it in a lot of different ways. Again, paid or unpaid, the contributions we make to our communities, our neighbors, our society. So that you do something that feels meaningful, that you belong, but it's not the only thing that you do. And you have time for love and care and connection. Because if you look at all of the happiness studies that have come out in recent years, the single thing that they all find is that when you have community, when you have relationships, it's the love and connection that leads to human happiness. And we are the only species really that play as adults. So to have time for exploration and imagination, and whimsy and fun, that to me, the opportunity for meaningful engagement in those three great arenas of life, I think that's what I'm trying to work for.
More choice and more control. The book is called Overwork: Transforming the Daily Grind into the Quest for a Better Life. You can get there. You deserve it. You've earned it. And by the way, I have a copy of the book right here, and it is a good book. It is a big book. And what I loved is that there is a meaty section at the end with all of your references. So unlike my books, I didn't just pull this out of where. I don't think I've ever seen a book with notes like this. So that shows you're taking it as seriously as possible. And there's a whole beautiful section, Appendix 1, that has all these tools and strategies. So this book is a book that you should go buy so that you can figure out and move on your quest to a better life. Her name is Bridget Schulte. You can follow. I just, some things just, I'm just going to have to accept the fact that I'm tongue-tied. You can follow her on Instagram, Mrs. Spock. You can connect with her on LinkedIn, on X. Buy it, obviously, wherever books are sold. And finally, last but not least, tell us just very briefly about the Better Life Lab.
Yeah, so we do a lot of research, reporting, storytelling, about looking for bright spots where people are able to combine work and care in meaningful ways, where it works, where people, that's the work that we're fighting for, telling the stories so we can have the public policy, the corporate practice, and the cultural norms that will enable us all to have opportunity to combine work and care in meaningful ways across the arc of our lives.
Well, Bridget, thank you again for coming in. And I'll tell you one person who is not a slacker, and if you tell him he is, he's going to come and hunt you down, and that's Chuck Norris.
You are Chuck Norris approved.
And we will be back soon. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching the show about hope, positivity, optimism, and if there's time left over, a little bit of marketing with your host, multiple author, and global keynote speaker, Joseph Jaffe. If you like the show, tell a friend or two. Please subscribe to the show, and if you want to get inside news, previews of upcoming guests, and much more, visit josephjaffe.com/subscribe to sign up for the show's newsletter.
And despite the best ministrations of your wife, you still look ugly.